Thanks for tuning in to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. When you're buying seed and getting ready to put it in the ground, you often look at the tag and you see warm germination percentage. And then you realize, wow, it's really cold and it's really wet out here. I wonder how accurate my warm germination score is going to be. Well, guess what? There's another test that is for cold, saturated soils. It's called the saturated cold germination test. So you may want to be looking at that on your farm too. We'll talk about that on today's show.
We're also going to discuss HPPD corn herbicides. They are extremely popular. They are extremely inexpensive. But should you be using them on your farm? We're going to talk about them today.
Well, wait a second, Brian. We might need them to control our weed of the week. We'll talk about what works best on this particular weed, and we've got an iron talk to discuss as well. But first, here's our farm basics.
Grain Depth Guard from Farm Shop MFG has helped farmers keep their bushels safe from spoilage and shrinkage loss in bins all across the country. And this low-cost solution just became even more affordable. Farm Shop MFG is offering a $100 factory rebate on all Grain Depth Guard bin monitoring systems. This offer is available for a limited time only, so take advantage of this program now to upgrade your bins and protect your crop investments. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little about the 2020 Ag PhD Winter Workshops.
Well, that's great, Brian, because we get to go inside. We don't have to do them outside in the field where it's cold. We get to go inside and talk about some of the lessons from 2019 and also look at how we can make next year's crop even better.
All right, so as always with Ag PhD workshops, they're free. We'd love to have you join us. We're going to be doing some things online as well, but the majority of our Ag PhD Winter Workshops this coming season are going to be right at our Ag PhD Field Day site at Baltic, South Dakota. So we'd love to have you join us there if you can. You can go to our website at agphd.com for the details on all the things that we're going to talk about right now. But I guess the one I want to highlight first is our collegiate workshop. Last year's the first year that we ever did an Ag PhD collegiate workshop. We'd love to have your college students come to this workshop, but also we'd love to have you come with them, whether you're the dad, the mom, the grandpa, the grandma, the uncle. Join your college student at our Ag PhD Collegiate Workshop. We're going to talk through all kinds of agronomy basics, everything from soils to fertility to weed, insect, and disease control. We got a lot of great things that we're going to cover at the collegiate workshops. Plus, we're going to give away a whole bunch of college scholarships.
That is exciting, Brian. And you know, some of that information we're going to go into a little more detail at other workshops. Like, for example, we're going to spend a workshop talking about tiling and all the information that you need to know in order to set up a plan on your own farm or to improve the tile that's already in your ground.
One of our most popular topics over the years has been soils. We're going to talk about how to read a soil test, how to make your own fertilizer recommendations, and how to put all this stuff into practice so it actually makes you money going forward.
And of course, we'll tie a lot of these things together with our agronomy workshops as well, where we're going to be talking about some of the different things it takes to have a successful crop out in your field and manage it throughout the season.
Well, mainly weed, insect, and disease control. Those are the key things that we talk about at our just base agronomy workshops. So there are a lot of different things to cover. Oh, and we should mention as well, at the Ag PhD Field Day site at the Morton Center, Neil Kinsey is going to do a 3-day workshop this coming season. It'll be the early part of March. Again, you can go to agphd.com for more details on that and any of our Ag PhD workshops.
So we look forward to seeing you this winter at one of our workshops. One of the things that we will probably be talking about is controlling this particular weed. Can you identify this week's weed of the week?
It's no secret that Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate with your schedule. Field conditions in recent years kept many from timely planting and fertilizing, and when you can't get your fertilizer applied, you lose thousands of dollars in yield potential. If you need flexibility in your fertility application timing, you need a drop tube system from C&R Supply. C&R drop tubes allow you to apply liquid nitrogen in season and place it exactly where your crop needs it. To learn more about low-cost C&R drop tube solutions, visit crsupply.com.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
Increase your productivity with Hypro's dual REBATE control system. The dual nozzle body design allows you to drive at the speed you want while maintaining the rate and droplet size you need. Hypro, helping you spray better.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Why do I farm? It's just something I've always wanted to do, something I've known since I was my daughter's age. When you farm, you have a responsibility to keep it growing, to look at a freshly planted field, a newborn calf, even your bottom line, then ask yourself, how do I help this grow? How can I make it even more productive? I ask myself these questions every day because no matter what I'm doing, I'm still a farmer.
One of the most important things when you plant your seed corn is that it all comes out of the ground. Well, if you look on the tag, like Darren said earlier in the show, it's going to give you a warm germination percentage. Honestly, that doesn't tell you diddly squat when it comes to very cold soils and the fact that they're wet. And you know what? You might even get some snow on that ground, and the ground then turns even colder. How is your seed going to perform in those situations? That's the reason why we would encourage you, take your seed and send it into a lab for a different type of test.
What Brian's talking about here is running a saturated cold germ test on your seed. Now, when you hear those words saturated and cold, wow, that's really been like the season that we had in 2019, right? So you say, I don't know if we'll have that season again, but I know it will be colder than a warm germ test, and it's going to be saturated. There's going to be some moisture out in that soil too in many cases. So the way they do the testing, they just take a 1/4 inch of soil, they'll saturate that with water and put the seeds in, and then they will run that test for about a week at about a 50-degree Fahrenheit or 10-degree Celsius soil temperature. So they'll have it very cold and very wet for a week. Then they'll warm things up for somewhere between 2 to 4 days. Now this varies a little bit lab to lab, somewhere in the 70 to 80 degree Fahrenheit range. So really warm and ideal conditions for a few days. How did that seed survive being in the cold and wet environment for quite a while?
We're talking about this today for two main reasons. Number one is we believe there's a lot of seed corn out on the market today that will not stand cold soil temps, and you don't know when you buy it. You're going to have to take your own test, your own sample, send it in for analysis and figure it out. The other reason why we're talking about this today is I am absolutely not a believer when you hear the words imbibitional chilling. People will say, oh, the first drink of water that seed takes, if it's cold, that's bad, and you're really going to hurt that seed. I absolutely don't think that is correct. And I can prove that by running the saturated cold germ test. So the whole thing here is we just want you to take the seed that you buy, try to bring it in early, send it in for analysis, and figure out, will this stuff survive in my cold soils? Now, if let's say you bought 10 different varieties this year and 8 of them work and 2 of them have a terrible cold score, you have 2 choices. Either you can send those 2 varieties back to whatever seed company it was, or you could just say, you know what, I'm going to plant these other 8 varieties in my colder soils, and the last 2 fields I plant are going to have these 2 varieties that don't stand that cold temp very well.
Well, it is one extra step, I understand that, but You're planting seed blind otherwise if you don't run this test on your farm. And you think about that, you throw out seed, what could that saturated cold germ test tell you? We've seen many samples over the last few years where we get saturated cold germs down at 50% or even less. That's scary if you only get a half a stand out there. There were a lot of stand complaints in 2019 and in 2018. I think many of these situations could have been prevented by just running a saturated cold germ test and knowing what you were planting up front. Here's the challenge, and here's one of the reasons why seed companies don't do this in many cases, and even the ones that do don't publish the results, because the standards are slightly different when you go lab to lab. There isn't a standard procedure that every lab follows, so those results could be slightly different since there isn't that industry standard.
We realize that you have probably bought seed corn your whole life and probably never pulled samples out and sent them in for analysis, but we're really encouraging you to do that. When you do, it's probably going to be eye-opening, and it's going to make you money in some cases because you may identify some seed you absolutely shouldn't plant in cold soil.
Well, no matter what seed you plant in the field, if you want to be successful, you've got to take care of our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
How much yield and profit did you lose the moment you put your seed in the ground? A poor stand at planting keeps your crops from reaching their yield potential, and closing the seed trench behind the planter is essential to establishing a good crop stand. The Germinator Closing Wheel from Farm Shop MFG is here to give your crop the strong start it needs for maximum yield. Act now to receive an early order rebate plus free shipping. Get ready for spring planting with the Germinator Closing Wheel. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
I need results, so I choose the one system I trust to take weeds down and keep them down on even my toughest acres with the kind of yield potential that helps keep me in the black to deliver my kind of results season after season. I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system. I choose results.
It's been remarkable what we've seen out of the varieties of Extend soybeans. The yield has come through for us.
We had the best soybean crop we've ever had. The yields were there.
With the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the yield boost and the lack of weed pressure really helps our bottom line.
The technology has exceeded my expectations. It's one thing that the industry has been looking for years.
There's nothing like harvesting record crops.
It starts with genetics, what you're made of. It takes agronomy. It's local. It's knowing your land and having the tools to put the right product in the right place. It's built on service with trust, grit, and determination. Because it turns out, what it takes to make the best product is a lot like what it takes to make a farmer. Golden Harvest, rooted in genetics, agronomy, and service.
HPPD corn herbicides are super popular because they're so inexpensive. But we want to talk today about some of the pitfalls of these HPPD products and also many of the strengths that make them the products they are.
Back before resistant weeds were a really big deal, I remember we used to talk about different chemical families, and I remember talking to more than one farmer who would say, why do I need to know all this stuff? I'm just going to buy something that kills the weeds and I'm good. Well, here we go with these HPPD products. Many of them are sold in premixes. So you may not even realize that you're buying an HPPD, and that's one of the reasons we're talking about this today, because there are so many inexpensive pre-emerge products that have a premix, including an HPPD, and there are also post-emerge products that are cheap that have an HPPD in them. So we want to make sure you understand what you're getting and then how to make the right choice.
So we could run through the entire list of everything at least we know of today, starting with just the straight goods. Not only do you have Callisto, Laudis, Impact, Armazon, but there are also a whole bunch of generic HPPD herbicides. When it comes to those combination products, you have everything from Acuron and Acuron Flexi, Halex GT from Syngenta. You've got Corteva out there making Resicor. Then, of course, Bayer has some of their products like Corvus and Caprino.
Now, the good things about the HPPDs, as Brian has already mentioned, is they're inexpensive and they work really well on a wide range of weeds. Now, they're not perfect, they're not completely bulletproof. There are a few things like, especially the viney type weeds and perennial weeds, HPPDs are not the best on, but still, on most of the weeds that we're after, including pigweed, in most areas of the country, HPPDs are highly effective. The key here is to just use one per season, not to use two. Now, when I talked about the pre's and the posts earlier, what I'm getting at here is if you use an HPPD in your pre-emerge product, don't use one in your post. What we've seen out in fields is bleaching of corn plants. We just get an overload of HPPD and the corn plants turn a little lighter shade of green or even turn white for a short period of time, hopefully. If you way overdo it, you can actually kill corn plants too. So you want to be cautious about using more than one. You also want to be cautious as you're applying any of these products not to have any overlap so you don't get more than the recommended rate.
And what this all comes back to is most of the HPPDs have pretty long residual. So that can lead to a carryover issue, and that's our number one concern when it comes to the HPPDs is, are you going to hurt next year's crop? Even with some products that they have a labeled rate that we just feel is high, you probably shouldn't go to that full labeled rate if, let's say, you're in a cold area of the country or you're in a dry area of the country. When you're cold or dry, the herbicide just isn't going to break down as quickly, and so going to that full maximum labeled rate could be pushing it, especially the later you spray in the season. So we just want you to be aware of all this and be thinking about it all the time that, you know, look, I don't care what the label says. I have to pay attention to my farm, my situation, and things are even worse when you have adverse soil conditions. If you have poor drainage, let's say you have ridiculously high pH or ridiculously low pH, you have excess salt, you have a sodic soil. All these factors would mean less breakdown of the herbicide and more potential for carryover.
Brian, one of the questions that we get a lot is, okay, you say I can use one of these pre-emerge products that has HPPDs in it, but some of them, for example, may have 6 ounces of meso in them. Well, I'm only using 3 ounces post. Would I be better to just use it post, or can my soil really break down the 6 ounces in those pre's?
Again, it all depends on your situation and where you're at. So work with your agronomist. Yes, in some areas, let's say I'm in Arkansas in lighter soil, I'm not super worried about getting the 6 ounces if I use it pre. But there's no possible chance I'd ever do that in South Dakota or North Dakota or Minnesota. Too much risk for carryover. All right, so carryover is one of our big concerns with HPPD. The other is weed resistance. We have already found some water hemp plants in the state of Nebraska that we believe are very resistant to HPPDs. I don't know that we're going to see this around the country. I don't know how quickly this is going to spread or anything else, but all I know is this. When you use multiple modes of action that are effective, you have far less chance for weed resistance developing. So our advice to you is don't just use 1 or even 2 effective modes of action. Try to always use 3 on every big weed that you're after on your farm. So if your number 1 target is water hemp, find 3 herbicides in corn and 3 herbicides in soybeans that will kill that weed, and you have very little chance of resistance ever developing in your operation.
You do have to be careful though, Brian, because many of these premixes that are out there are talking about that they have multiple modes of action, but the key word here was effective modes of action. And one product in particular I think about is Corvus. Well, you've got an ALS and you've got an HPPD. And if you've got resistance of pigweeds to HPPDs, all of a sudden you have no effective modes of action. Now some guys will mix some atrazine in and say, well, I've got 3 modes of action. Now you're down to 1, and you probably have a low rate of atrazine too. So be really cautious about choosing the right ones.
Yeah, just so we're clear here, Darren's saying ALS herbicides aren't going to kill water hemp. For that matter, I don't know that atrazine is going to take your water hemp out either. HPPD, if we're seeing resistant water hemp, well, you might have 3 modes of action there, but none of them, or maybe at best 1 or 2 of them, could be effective, certainly not all 3.
Well, I've talked a lot about these HPPD products, and again, we really do like them. The question now is how to use them for 2020.
All right, so number 1, we want to make sure that you get good weed control. Use an HPPD because it's inexpensive. I think that's a fantastic move, but have 3 effective modes of action on every big target weed that you are after. Number 2, be concerned about carryover. Concern from 2019, if you sprayed late, if you used too high a rate, you got to really worry about that carryover. And if you are very concerned about carryover, just plant corn in there again. Spraying in 2020, keep your rate down as much as you can. Still get the weed control, but make sure you don't have the carryover issue. And again, work with your agronomist because your soil, your situation may be different than even your neighbors.
Well, fortunately, there are several modes of action that could be effective on our Weed of the Week. We'll talk about what will work best coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our Weed of the Week is velvet leaf.
One of the reasons we talked about HPPDs and keeping them effective in our fields is because of velvet leaf. When the HPPDs first came out, it was a game changer. I remember talking to seed corn producers where they were detasseling and they're opening that canopy up mid-season, and they said the velvet leaf just comes back terrible as soon as they started using an HPPD product, at that time Callisto. They just wiped it out and they had season-long control. They were super happy with the kind of residual we got. So when it comes to corn and velvet leaf control, I like having an HPPD in the mix. Personally, I like to use it post-emerge. I like to use one of those HPPDs with a half pound of atrazine where you can post-emerge in corn. So pre-emerge, I won't use an HPPD. There's a lot of different choices. I'd probably run with Verdict.
Yeah, if it was me, I'd probably go Sure Start or Triple Flex, but the whole thing is, again, try to get 2 shots, get multiple effective modes of action on that weed. Now, it is just an annual weed. That's the good thing about velvet leaf, but it was one of the worst weeds that we've ever had, so it still could come back to that again if we have this resistance issue. That's why you got to use the multiple effective modes of action.
You know, you may be onto something there, Brian, with the Sure Start and Triple Flex in corn because they've got Python in them. It's a highly effective chemistry on velvet leaf, and Python by itself can be used in soybeans. So I'd add Python to your soybean pre-program, and I'd come back post-emerge in conventional beans with Pursuit or Raptor. You could also spike in a little bit of Flex Star for some more kick.
Generally speaking, we don't have a major problem with velvet leaf in wheat, but if you're worried about it, I would start with Sharpen, and then I'd probably follow post-emerge with Husky.
That's all the time we have for this week's Weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid, moves you closer to your target.
Find love, then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
Every day, we rise. We face the pressure, the uncertainty. Sometimes the decisions we make seem as tough as the work we do. Let the Acceleron portfolio lighten your load with a powerful array of seed treatments, fungicides, insecticides, nematicides, and bioenhancers offered in select combinations to give you coverage with one simple decision. Looking for a little peace of mind? We're on it.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
Why do I farm? It's just something I've always wanted to do. Something I've known since I was my daughter's age. When you farm, you have a responsibility to keep it growing. To look at a freshly planted field, a newborn calf, even your bottom line, then ask yourself, how do I help this grow? How can I make it even more productive? I ask myself these questions every day because no matter what I'm doing, I'm still a farmer.
There's so much work to do in the spring that finding a way to do two things at once can really save some time. If mixing herbicides with fertilizer is one of those two jobs at once things on your farm, I'll share some tips to help it go smoothly in today's Iron Talk. Full disclosure here, we mix liquid fertilizer with pre-plant herbicides every year on our farm on thousands of acres, and yes, we've had trouble a couple of times in the past. However, we mix the two with full confidence today based on what we've learned, which is why I'm excited to share with you today these 5 steps to successfully mix herbicides and fertilizer. First, jar test. All you have to do is put your exact mixture in advance in a small clear jar, and this can help you avoid a large-scale mess in your sprayer. Second, herbicides may not mix well with straight fertilizer. It's best to mix some water into the solution first or dilute the herbicide with water before putting it in the tank. This helps the herbicide have something to bind to, as fertilizer isn't always the best host. Also, have a jug of Convert on hand just in case you have any issues, or better yet, if you'd like to prevent issues by using a compatibility agent. Third point, warmer temperatures help nearly everything work better. So if you can keep fertilizer and herbicide in warm storage if at all possible, it really makes a difference. Fourth, agitation throughout the whole process can help keep things in suspension. And fifth, don't let your spray tanks with blended products sit. Mix up only what you can spray right away. You can save some time and get two things done at once. Most pre-plant herbicides can be mixed with fertilizer. Just follow our 5 steps to avoid problems on your farm. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's our time for today, but before we go, we want to invite you to check out the Ag PhD radio show. If you're looking for more agronomic information, Ag PhD Radio is your home. We're on at 2 p.m. Central each weekday on SiriusXM Channel 147.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.